Hey everyone, so in this video I wanted to go over this past month where I participated in No Nut November and also give some of my perspective on the NoFap community as someone who's been dealing with pornography addiction throughout my teenage years and into my early adulthood. As of posting this recording, it should be December 1st, so all the sorry souls who actually went through with this challenge are probably going to resume their degenerate behavior as soon as possible. And before you guys hand me the Congressional Medal of Honor, I do have a confession I need to make, which is I actually failed within the first few days of November because my initial thought process was, I'm just getting too old for this shit. I mean, I don't have the actual data, but I can make a strong guess that the majority of people who actually take this seriously are chronically online teenagers. However, I had moved back to my mom's house on November 5th, and I was thinking to myself that it wouldn't hurt to actually try this year because I'm in a new environment and I don't have a lot to keep myself occupied with, so I might as well take this chance to practice my self discipline. Plus, I really haven't attempted No Nut November since I was in my junior year of high school, so roughly 5 years ago. Because back then, there was this cringe competition where I'd compete with my high school friends to see who could complete the whole month, and I remember the longest I ever lasted was 15 days before I caved. But yeah, I'm on my 27th day so far, and I just moved everything 5 days forward, making December 4th my 30th day. And I suppose you can call me a cheat or that I already lost the challenge, but I really do not care because the entire idea of abstaining for 30 days is already arbitrary to begin with, so I don't see why I can't just adjust the range to fit my personal goal. And the whole idea of going 30 days isn't a big deal to me anymore because earlier in the year I went from July 4th to August 3rd without porn or masturbation, so I'm fairly confident that I can go 4 more days. And technically, the longest I've ever gone was, I want to say 50 days when I was a junior in college, because I had a shared dorm and bathroom with other people, so I literally didn't have a single private space to myself. But I don't count that because I felt like I was forced into abstinence instead of it being my own choice. And as soon as I got back home from spring break, which was around the half point of my semester, I just started gooning again, no hesitation, until I had to leave again for school. One thing I did different is that I didn't stick to the traditional rules of No Nut November, which is that I was really just following the NoFap rules. I'll spare you from having to go onto Reddit and I'll just show you the differences on the video now. But basically, the only thing that matters in No Nut November is that you can't ejaculate, you can still watch porn or masturbate. But for NoFap, you can't do any of those three things, which is what I've been sticking to as rules for this month and earlier this year. One final technicality I want to mention is that I would come across softcore porn on Instagram and YouTube, which is any kind of sexual content that is more suggestive than explicit. It's kind of hard to differentiate, but my interpretation is as long as it doesn't have sexual nudity, because I think artistic nudity is fine, or people participating in explicit sexual behavior like intercourse, it's not hardcore. I feel the only way to avoid this kind of content is to not be on social media at all, because sooner or later it's going to be on your algorithm. And I was thinking I'm already abstaining from two of my favorite copes, so I wasn't willing to give up doom scrolling as well. But I will cut myself some slack for the reasoning that I wasn't actively searching for this type of stuff. I think I've covered all the specifics of what I was doing for No Nut November, and now I want to go into my results of NoFap. And sorry to disappoint anyone, but I didn't get the confidence to approach 1,000 women, my testosterone levels haven't quadrupled, and I still haven't achieved enlightenment. In fact, I really haven't gotten any tangible or noticeable benefits from participating in this. I think the only difference I've noticed is that I'm more horny because I haven't jerked off or watched porn in nearly a month. And honestly, most people who participate in No Nut November aren't really accomplishing anything, especially if they're only refraining from jerking off and still consuming porn. Because I don't believe there's anything inherently wrong or selfish about masturbating. My main gripe is that I've associated it so strongly with porn that it feels impossible to uncouple the two. I mean, there are a few benefits to masturbating, such as stress relief, improved sleep, and reduced risk of prostate cancer. Maybe I could find some more, but those are the most notable. That's to say, in an ideal world, we'd all just be jerking off without the compulsion to watch porn at the same time. But as long as you have access to the internet, you're going to stumble upon sexual content eventually and make that connection. And I don't think creating a hard ban on porn is going to solve anything, because people are always going to find loopholes to access this stuff, especially when it comes to something as intangible as digital media. And I think it's up to the parents to educate their children on the addictive nature of porn, or more broadly, digital content. But that's asking way too much these days. I mean, you go outside and see a family, and 9 times out of 10, their child is glued to a device. Not saying I was much better at that age with regulating my technology use, but fortunately I wasn't exposed to the toxic sludge that is short form content. I thought about continuing my streak past December 5th, but I really don't see any point. It genuinely feels like this addiction is impossible to overcome, even though this year I've made the most progress in my entire life. I remember throughout my teenage years, which is a pretty important time to practice things like socializing, I would always feel very complacent, especially in regards to getting into a relationship or even having female friends. Because in my head, I'd figured out that watching porn was a good enough replacement for that kind of connection. And because it seemed so impossible to get a girlfriend, I just resigned myself to simulating the most satisfying parts of a relationship, which in my teenage brain just boiled down to sex. And this point is anecdotal, but maybe other men my age can relate, is that I had a much higher libido when I first hit puberty and into my teenage years. Which, come to think of it, is probably why I was never able to complete No Nut November in previous years, or just generally remain abstinent. I know I get into some personal stuff on the channel, but there's some shit I don't want to remember, let alone talk about openly, that I did just because I was a horny teenager with nothing better to do. So, in my impressive reasoning skills, I thought that channeling my abundant sexual energy into porn consumption and masturbating would help me cope with my lack of intimacy. And that was technically correct because I felt reasonably satisfied throughout that time. Only looking back now do I realize how much it fucked me over developmentally and discouraged me from trying to connect with women my age. And I also want to bring up 2 factors that made seeing the negative effects of porn quite difficult for me earlier in my life. The first one is, at least in the US, sex is still quite a taboo topic. I can't speak to other Western countries, but I believe the US is a special case because we've been in this culture war between progressives and conservatives, with sexuality being a main contention point. Again, this is kind of an oversimplification of the issue, but I think that it's up to parents to educate their children and decide to what extent they want to talk about it. Personally, in my family, my parents never gave me the talk about sex or even mention any sexual matters. I think they assumed I would figure it out on my own. Though I kind of wish they had, but it doesn't really matter that much in the long term. And I don't want to make a definitive claim on where the US should be at in terms of sexual education. I will leave the politics to the people who enjoy having endlessly futile arguments. But the second factor I think that discourages people from openly talking about sex is the normalization of overly sexual content in our media. Because with the popularization of short form content, it makes sense that one of the easiest ways to grab people's attention is to appeal to our base instincts. And I don't think anything activates our primate brains faster than the opposite sex engaging in sexually charged behavior. Actually, I think the fact that most of it is softcore porn might be even worse, because by leaving the most sexual parts to our imagination, you're heightening that feeling of anticipation. And supporters of this content are just going to look the other way and say, oh, well, it's good that people are expressing themselves openly. There's no need to feel ashamed about your body and that it's empowering women. I know that sexual content marketed towards women has also gone out of hand, but I'm going to be speaking from the male experience. And even then, the 2 types aren't that comparable because men are so much more down bad than women. Like, it is genuinely not even a competition who's more desperate between the 2 groups. And it's kind of ironic that normalizing sexual content would make people less inclined to talk about it. But my explanation is that since the US already has this taboo against sex, people have decided, well, it's best to keep this to myself. But in the back of your mind, you know that other people are indulging in the same stuff, so it doesn't make you feel as bad. I'm gonna sound crazy, but I'd bet you that a significant amount of the guys I was around during my time in middle school, high school, and even college were addicted to porn, but it's not like it was up to us to have that conversation among ourselves. So we're in this society that is sexually repressed, but also has normalized consumption of sexual content, which seems like a recipe for chronic loneliness and depravity. But before you lose all hope, here comes the NoFap community, like an angel sent from the heavens, ready to whisk us away from the anguish of our porn-addicted misery. But after digging a bit deeper, and I do not use this word lightly, but NoFap is built upon, maintained, and reinforced by pure, unadulterated cope. And I might not be showing the NoFap community in the best light, because we're talking about people who use Reddit here, but it was just a giant circle jerk of people celebrating arbitrary milestones, showing off how long they've gone without touching their dick. Don't get me wrong, if you're actually taking steps to improve your life within that time frame, then I don't want to take that away from you. But if you're just counting down the days until you reach your next week, month, or year of abstinence, you're better off with another cope that will actually give you dopamine. And this is going to be depressing, But even though I'm still actively trying to stay away from porn consumption, I know it's not gonna undo all the damage it did to my social and psychological development during the years I needed to abstain from it the most. However, I do want to try and end this video on a positive note by saying that I do have a temporary cure to porn addiction, and that is to just get a girlfriend. And before you congratulate me on making this groundbreaking discovery, let me explain as to why it would help. So when you're watching porn and masturbating, you're just fulfilling your base instincts to reproduce. But it's an imperfect coping mechanism because you're missing out on plenty of other crucial aspects like emotional connection and physical intimacy. The only reason it gives more dopamine than sex is because we made the visual stimuli so incredibly sexual that if it were to happen in real life, you probably wouldn't enjoy it nearly as much when compared to just consuming the media from a screen. Therefore, all you need is a girlfriend to fulfill this desire, along with receiving a bunch of the other benefits aside from sexual satisfaction. And all of this is great in an ideal world, but if you're like me who's been addicted to porn for nearly half my life, it's going to take your brain a while to temper its expectations as to what an actual sexual experience is about. Also, there are countless cases of cheating or still watching porn during relationships, but that's a problem for people in the relationship to solve, not some chronically online loser on the internet. So I think that's all I wanted to say for this video. Just to sum up some stuff, No Nut November is cringe and worthless. Porn addiction is bad and you should stop watching it. Our society is actively encouraging porn consumption while still repressing conversations around sex education. And there are two main ways to deal with porn addiction. You can get a girlfriend or wife to fulfill the actual need of being in a relationship, or cope by doing NoFap for an arbitrary amount of time until you manage to reach the first solution, or just die alone. Okay, I hope you got something out of this video. What I said was largely derivative of what other people say in this space, but that's what I get for making a video about one of the most overly discussed topics on the internet. I think I was just tired of seeing the self-improvement side of YouTube treat NoFap like a magical solution when in reality it's just another cope for male loneliness. And I know I said I was going to probably go back to gooning after December 5th, but I'm not that certain. But I just have to be honest right now, I just miss watching porn so much. Like, my life is so goddamn boring right now. Okay, I'm actually done with the video.